Matthew Falder, 29, once a promising academic, descended into extreme depravity, blackmailing and humiliating his many victims into performing ever-increasingly despicable acts on themselves and others. Hidden behind a veil of false dark web identities, he became notorious in extreme online circles, sharing vile content on hardcore websites, and in return gaining exclusive access to illicit materials. He preyed on individuals regardless of age or gender, yet he never physically met his victims. His ruthless desire for control and his relentless cruelty have inflicted deep and irreversible damage, making this case one of the most harrowing and disturbing I have ever covered. I remember when Falder was arrested, and I was shocked and disgusted by his crimes. It always stuck with me, and the only reason I haven't covered this case already is because I assumed it was already well known. But as it turns out, I don't think it is. Falder is everyone's worst nightmare from the dark web. He's relentless and ruthless, and his only goal is to take everything away from you. He wants you to be terrified, and he wants you to feel like there's no way out. Be warned, this is a rough one. This video is created solely for educational and documentary purposes. It does not endorse or condone the criminal actions described within. Matthew Falder, born on October 24th, 1988, in Manchester, England, enjoyed a privileged upbringing in the tranquil town of Knutsford, Cheshire. His family's comfortable lifestyle was supported by his father, Stephen Falder, who led the UK's largest independent paint manufacturer, HMG Paints. A standout student from a young age, Falder attended the private King's School in Macclesfield before furthering his education at the prestigious Cambridge University. At Cambridge, his peers knew him as a confident, humorous individual with a magnetic personality, and he earned respect as a promising scientist specializing in seismic oceanography. Falder's potential was evident as he embarked on a postdoctoral research career in geophysics at the University of Birmingham. His academic excellence was not unnoticed. One tutor even remarked on his significant international contributions to the field and said he was one of the best students that they had ever taught. Throughout his first year at Cambridge, Falder began a decade-long relationship with a woman who was the same age but shall not be named. Despite the outward normalcy of their relationship, beneath the surface, violence was brewing within Falder, totally unbeknownst to his girlfriend. It was at university that Falder's crimes began, and over time they would escalate in severity. He started with covert surveillance of his female housemates, secretly installing cameras in the bathroom, as can be seen in this clip. He once confessed to a male housemate what he was doing, but when his disturbing admission was met with alarm, he brushed it off as just humour. This was the beginning of a contrasting outward demeanour and a hidden dark reality. His fascination with unauthorised filming intensified to the point where he used his 21st birthday as a way for further invasions of privacy. He arranged a bus trip for numerous friends from Cambridge to visit his parents' numerous homes. This was a big party. Falder used this opportunity to capture unsuspecting women naked without their consent. Over time, Falder's actions became more depraved. He devised a deceitful scheme to ensnare victims, adopting the guise of Liz, a fictitious female artist on Gumtree and Facebook. He targeted individuals, advertising babysitting or pet walking services, baiting them with offers of up to £4,000 for nude photographs, under the pretense of needing them for therapeutic charcoal sketches. He told them, as Liz, that her therapist had told her that this would help her, and that once she was done, she would destroy the photograph and nobody else would see it. Falder was preying on vulnerable people who were desperate for money, and most of the people he would ensnare were young females. He chose Gumtree and Facebook for their ease of creating new profiles. Upon receiving the images, his true intentions surfaced. He was extremely computer savvy and was able to locate the victim's personal profile, and then he would blackmail his victims, threatening to distribute the photos to their families, acquaintances, work and schools, unless they complied with his increasingly degrading demands.
Have you done that?
No comment.
Have you sent pictures of your blackmail victims to the parents?
No comment.
Of the victim, the grandparents?
No comment.
The workplace?
No comment.
The schools?
No comment.
Falder coerced his victims into posing in humiliating positions, often holding signs bearing messages like, "I am a sex slave." He escalated his demands to the point of forcing them to record themselves, engaging in acts of degradation, such as making them go to McDonald's or train station public toilets and film themselves licking the toilet seat or brushes, or eating used sanitary products, or even dog food. He made them pose with photos of Hitler and make them sing extremely offensive songs, all for the purpose of future manipulation. The victims were never meant to comply with him. One young female sent him over 200 images, but it was never enough, and there was never an end unless they did it themselves. The impact of his actions was so severe and far-reaching as he widely distributed his content on websites for people with sinister interests like his, leaving lasting scars on the lives of the affected people. The website of which he uploaded the images to was called Hurt to the Core, which is on the dark web and known as the worst website in the world. It is an extreme website containing the worst kind of content you can imagine. Even before you sign up, the pre-registration disclaimer is too extreme for me to be able to read here. It is a place for the sickest individuals to share and push each other further into depravity. You get rewarded for uploads and how popular they prove to be, and Falder was top ranked on this website. He took great pride and got a sense of power from being so popular on the sick site. He had his own series of images, of which contained torture of the most vulnerable, which proved to be very popular. The content, I cannot stress enough, is as bad as it gets, and it's hard to believe that places like this really exist, but they do. Sickening. He uploaded images with text all about his victims. One of the victims, who sent him over 200 images, was threatened with those images being sent to her mother and school. The dialogue from the messaging between himself and the victim was screenshotted and uploaded to the website as the audience got a sick kick out of her anguish. Falder also posed as a teenage female in an online forum and was able to convince a young vulnerable female from Eastern Europe to be his girlfriend. In an online exchange with another abuser, he said of her, and quote, "I'm thinking of just betraying her as harshly as I can to see how much I can mentally F her up. I think there is even a bit of a chance that she ends it all." Another victim was a young female in foster care who was told her disabled brother would be taken away from her if she did not keep sending degrading photos. Falder forced her to pose with a sign that said, "I look after my disabled brother, and now I am being forced to strip." Harrowingly, he also managed to manipulate a young father into forcing himself on his son and filming it, to which Falder shared with his fellow sick friends.
The images that he provided to you, have you shared them with anybody else?
No comment.
Have you distributed those images to any like-minded individuals on the forums we've discussed previously?
No comment.
Or with any other person?
No comment.
He also shared instructional videos on how to intimately abuse youths, as well as guidance on how to give youths sweets, which were soaked in urine or even more disturbing bodily fluids. In further posts, he wrote about arranging to meet a blackmailed victim for intimacy in a remote location, and told how he would make the person tie themselves to a tree, lock the bindings and throw away the key to ensure a slow and painful death. Falder also suggested a twisted game in which a curling iron would be inserted into a woman's vagina and could only be turned off if they answered a question correctly. He also posted a video of a man repeatedly throwing a victim who couldn't swim into a pool, with them submerged for several seconds each time, and also spoke of fantasies of breaking victims' bones one by one until they slowly died. It is truly the worst of the worst. Falder prided himself on his notoriety as a blackmailer, frequently gloating to his victims about his supposed anonymity and elusiveness from the law, stating that he could never be caught. He used a network of encrypted email addresses and advanced Tor software, which gives anonymity online and hides your activity. It also facilitates access to the dark web. Additionally, he strategically utilized email accounts based in Russia, aware that such a move would create significant hurdles for the British authorities pursuing his case. He used usernames such as In the Garden, Evil Mind, 666 Devil, but in total he had 70 different online identities.
And it's become apparent that obviously that's an email account that's current and you're using at this moment in time. Is that correct?
No comment.
Is there any other email accounts, Matthew, that you're using at the current time?
No comment.
If there are any more email accounts, what are the passwords?
No comment.
In 2014, under the alias 666 Devil, Falder asked for suggestions from fellow Hurt to the Core users on methods to inflict torture on his daughter for what he called the week of suffering. In truth, Falder never had a daughter. These were in fact intended for another father that he was blackmailing. This disturbing questioning drew the attention of law enforcement and prompted an urgent worldwide investigation by various national crime agencies aimed at rescuing the girl in peril. The agencies involved were the Government Communications Headquarters, which is one of the 3 intelligence services in the UK, the US Department of Homeland Security, Europol, the Australian Federal Police, and the New Zealand and Israeli police. This investigation was so complex that it lasted for 4 years. And this was 4 years in which Falder was still extorting his victims and forcing them to create content. During this time, 4 of his victims tried to end everything. Once the investigation was nearing completion, they had an address in Birmingham, England, and the name Falder. Before they arrested him, they had to observe him using the laptop, as can be seen here. They did this to prove that he was the man behind the screen, as he never met any of his victims in real life, which is actually amazing and infuriating when you consider what depraved acts he forced people to do. On June 21st, 2017, authorities detained Falder at his workplace. The arresting officers observed that he seemed stunned and at a loss for words, struggling to comprehend the unfolding situation. When they handcuffed him, Falder downplayed the severity of his actions, claiming that he was innocent. He attempted to rationalize his use of the dark web, suggesting a mix-up, saying he used it to prevent his girlfriend from discovering his online activities, such as seeing images of other women. When he asked what he was supposed to have done, the officer read a few of his charges, to which he replied,
"Sounds like the rap sheet from hell."
Upon his arrest, the police discovered 484 illicit images on Falder's computer in his flat. Further investigation into his online activities revealed that his uploads to the Hurt to the Core site had earned him VIP status, a grim reward to the nature of his contributions. This led to Falder being charged with 188 offences, underlining the extensive and serious nature of his criminal conduct. It is believed that Falder had between 60 and 180 victims. NCA Senior Investigator Officer Matt Sutton said, "In more than 30 years of law enforcement, I've never come across an offender whose sole motivation was to inflict such profound anguish and pain. Matthew Falder revelled in it. I've also never known such an extremely complex investigation, with an offender who is technologically savvy and able to stay hidden in the darkest recesses of the dark web. This investigation represents a watershed moment." Will Kerr, NCA Director of Vulnerabilities, warned, "Falder is not alone. There are many other users of some of these dark websites that we are very concerned about." Cambridge University, which said it was appalled at the crimes, was actively pursuing stripping him of his qualifications, in a very rare move for the institution. Birmingham University said it was deeply shocked and distressed to hear of the offences. A Gumtree spokesman said it welcomed Falder's conviction, adding that it takes safety of its users extremely seriously. In court, a victim told that she was approached by Falder on Gumtree after advertising for nanny work to support her studies. Falder, under the guise of Liz, offered her money for nude photos. Once she complied, Liz, in reality Falder, began to threaten her, claiming he had tracked her down on Facebook, knew her friends and her address. The victim was bombarded with daily messages from Falder from the moment she woke up until she went to bed, instilling a relentless sense of fear. She felt alienated from her family, believing they couldn't possibly understand the trauma she had endured. The humiliation of the images made it impossible for her to share her plight with them. She spoke of the unique torment of psychological manipulation. She said, "I felt that no one would understand me because there was no one there holding a knife to me. The ordeal left her feeling isolated and impairing her relationships with her friends and family. She spoke of the difficulty maintaining close connections when trust is fundamentally shattered. At one point, she no longer wanted to go to school or be at home because she knew Falder had her addresses. On October 16th, 2017, Falder admitted to 137 charges involving 47 individuals. Will Kerr, an officer with the National Crime Agency, said that throughout his 28-year career, he had never come across an individual as dangerous as Falder. Phil McKay, a BBC journalist with 25 years of experience covering numerous trials, echoed this sentiment, stating he had never heard testimony as abhorrent as that presented at Falder's case. During the trial, which spanned 3 days, Falder remained emotionless. It took the court 35 minutes to read out the entirety of his crimes. On February 17th, 2018, Judge Philip Barker handed down a sentence of 32 years imprisonment with an additional 6 years on extended license upon release. The judge branded him an internet highwayman, adding, "You wanted to assume total control over your victims. Your behaviour was cunning, persistent, manipulative and cruel. For the victims," he said, "the damage is ongoing for these individuals. It will never end, knowing the abuse caused by you still exists in other unknown persons' computers." The judge also concluded Falder was a dangerous offender, adding, "These sentencing remarks underplay your relentless, obsessive desire to continue committing offences." This case left a lasting impression on law enforcement and journalists alike due to the disturbing nature of the crimes. Despite a promising start in life, Falder's descent into criminality was profound. His initial 32-year sentence was reduced to 25 after an appeal, a decision that caused a lot of controversy considering the nature of his crimes. This case shows the horrific potential for how the internet can be exploited for malevolent purposes and the enduring scars left on the victims of these heinous crimes. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay sane. On the morning of March 10th, in Mykolaiv, Ukraine, a local man on his way to work found that his car would not start, so instead he opted to walk. His route took him past a desolate construction site where he was startled by the sound of faint screams. Trusting his instincts, he alerted the police. Quick to respond, the officers discovered 18-year-old Oksana lying on a large pile of rubbish. She had been brutally set ablaze and left to succumb to her grievous injuries. But defying all odds, Oksana clung to life. Though her condition was precarious, her internal organs had boiled inside her due to the intense heat. Oksana was too weak to stand, and the burns on her body also prevented this. But she summoned the strength to speak, and with her fading breaths, she revealed to the officers the identity of the men who had left her for dead. The ordeal Oksana endured was truly horrifying. The perpetrators shown a callous disregard for human life, underlined by a chilling sense of entitlement and brutality. Their actions, devoid of any compassion, show how dark seemingly ordinary people can be. This is the kind of case where justice can never truly be served. This video is created solely for educational and documentary purposes. It does not endorse or condone the criminal actions described within. Oksana Makar was born on June 11th, 1993 in the humble village of Luch, Ukraine. Oksana's upbringing was far from easy. Her mother, Tatiana, was a heavy drinker and had convictions for robbery amongst other things. After her birthday, Oksana's biological father, Sergei Ikovich Makar, left the young mother and daughter. He too struggled with addiction and had previous criminal convictions for theft and substance smuggling. A few years later, Oksana's mother was sentenced to imprisonment in Kherson for robbery. Oksana was then raised by her grandparents, and she continued to live in Luch. There, Oksana began attending first grade. She was prone to stealing, even at this young age. She would steal items from classmates and even teachers. When she reached third grade, her grandfather decided to enroll her in a special educational boarding school. She began on May 25th, 2003. She broke out of here many times, but was always brought back. Oksana was known to be confrontational and straight to the point, yet she was equally recognized for her generosity, earning her popularity in school. Although she had mild learning difficulties and didn't excel in traditional academic subjects, Oksana found her niche in artistic pursuits. By the age of 18, she had drifted away from education and employment, a common narrative for the young people living in the village of Luch, where job prospects were scarce. Oksana spent her days finding solace in the escape provided by alcohol, utilizing whatever meager funds she could find. Oksana would frequently escape to the bustling city of Mykolaiv, a place where she could unwind and socialize over drinks with friends. On the evening of March 9th, 2012, Oksana, then 18 years old, made her way to the heart of Mykolaiv, to the familiar bar cafe called Fish. She was out to celebrate International Women's Day. This cafe was a place of comfort for her, a spot where even the bartender recognized her. That night, Oksana indulged in a modest celebration with just a can of beer and a box of juice. Around 10 p.m, a group of familiar young men entered the cafe and took a seat nearby. Noticing them, Oksana moved over to join their table, welcoming the company and the night's unfolding events. The three men were Yevhen Krosnoshok, Maxim Prisnuik, and Artem Pohozyan. All were in their early 20s. They plied Oksana with more alcohol. As the night progressed, she became heavily intoxicated. Later, it would emerge that concerns arose amongst the bar staff and customers, with people suggesting her drink may have been spiked with a substance, leaving her in a vulnerable state. With Oksana out of sorts, the three men offered to take her back to Maxim's apartment, saying that she would be safe there and that she would be allowed to recover. However, only Artem and Yevhen walked Oksana back to the apartment. Maxim instead went over to his parents' house and made sure he was seen by as many people as possible to build some kind of alibi. Maxim is part of an influential family with deep roots in government circles in the Mykolaiv region, suggesting a network that extended well beyond the mere reaches of wealth and status. Maxim had been a director at a utility company, a role which saw him overseeing the energy supply to the educational institutions and local enterprises. His encounters with Oksana had left him with a sense of humiliation. Despite his persistent pursuit and invitations for a date, she remained uninterested, rejecting his repeated advances. In Maxim's perspective, his status gave him power and a presumed right to the affections of any woman he chose. They did, however, remain friends and kept in touch. Upon arrival at the apartment, Oksana, feeling extremely unwell, got on Maxim's bed and fell asleep. Once Maxim arrived back and the three men were together, the attack began to take place. The three men took it in turns to repeatedly force themselves upon Oksana as she was passed out on the bed. Whilst Yevhen was attacking her, she woke up. Yevhen recounted a harrowing scene. In the throes of panic, Oksana fought back vehemently, her screams filling the air as she struggled against him. Neighbours reportedly heard these screams, but unfortunately didn't report it to the authorities. In a chilling response, Yevhen resorted to strangulation, tightening his grip around her neck until her movements ceased. Believing he had ended her life, he then continued to finish the attack. With Oksana lying motionless, presumed dead, the men deliberated over the grim possibility of her awakening, her memory of the assault, and most importantly, who did it to her. Determined to prevent this, Yevhen and Artem departed to seek a location to dispose of her body. They knew of one place, an abandoned construction site for a local clinic. They felt it was perfect as it was isolated and close by, leaving them little chance of being spotted. As the men returned to the apartment, they began to wrap Oksana up in a blanket and pillowcase. But then, to their horror, they realized she was still breathing. Yevhen, without hesitation, grabbed a thick cord and wrapped it around her neck and pulled it as tight as he could until, once more, she had stopped breathing. Again, they wrapped her in the pillowcase and blanket and transported her to the desolate grounds of the abandoned construction site. In their haste to move through the building, they accidentally dropped Oksana onto the ground. There was quite a thud, but she made no sound, which led the men to the grim conclusion that she was now for certain deceased. Navigating their way into the bowels of the construction site, they located a vast pit, a grim receptacle overflowing with waste, rubbish bags and assorted debris. There, the three men disposed of her body, callously flinging it atop of the pile. And then, in an appalling act of cruelty, they set the rubbish next to her ablaze, effectively cooking her in a giant barbecue. For 10 long hours, Oksana lay in the rubbish in extreme temperatures, but somehow she survived. She mustered the strength to scream for help, albeit faintly. This is when, the next morning, a local man walked by the construction site on his way to work. Just 4 minutes later, officers arrived and helped her to her feet, but she fell. Her feet were badly burned, but she did tell the officers who did this to her. She named the three men, Yevhen, Maxim and Artem. She told officers how Maxim had been infatuated with her, desperate for them to be in a relationship together. She said how he even offered her money to be with him, but she refused. It was later revealed that he had made a plan with his friends, Yevin and Artem, to have a violent but not deadly encounter with her. They planned to spike her, get her to Maxim's apartment, but she was never supposed to wake up. Oksana was rushed to the hospital in a dire state, naked, wrapped only in a police coat, with distinct marks around her neck from strangulation. The severity of her burns were profound, leaving medical professionals astonished at her survival. The attending doctor remarked on the depth of her burns, noting that one would have to be exposed to intense heat for an extended duration to sustain such injuries, which is exactly what happened. 10 long hours. Her prognosis was bleak. The prolonged exposure to the smouldering debris had caused such extensive damage that some of her internal organs had nearly fully boiled inside her. Oksana's mother, Tatiana, gave a statement to the reporters saying, "Oksana is currently in intensive care. Doctors initially gave her a 2% chance of survival, but now it's down to 0.5%. The doctors said that in their 30 years of practice, they have never seen anything like this. Usually, they said, people die within 2 to 3 hours, and that's with lesser burns. Oksana has 55%. She's my only one. I would give everything for her, all my skin, kidneys, anything, just for her to live." On March 9th, acting on Oksana's identification, the police apprehended the 3 men associated with her assault. However, in a turn of events that would raise eyebrows, 2 of the suspects, Maxim and Artem, were released on bail with travel restrictions the following morning on March 11th. The decision was widely criticized in Ukrainian media. According to reports, the individuals released on bail were so-called privileged individuals, children of high-ranking officials. Yevyen, who had been directly involved in strangling Oksana, was the only one who remained in custody. On March 12th, in a bid to save her life, Oksana underwent an amputation of her right arm. They were forced to do so to avoid blood infection from severe burns. She was also offered the chance to get specialist treatment in Moscow, but the doctors refused, saying that in her condition she could not travel anywhere. In a heartening display of community solidarity, over 150 residents of Mykolaiv came forward to donate blood for Oksana. On the morning of March 13th, a contingent of local residents gathered in protest outside the Central Police Department building. In a dramatic display of outrage, they set fire to a mannequin representing one of the accused. The public were enraged, and out of fear or more unrest, the officers again arrested Maxim and Artem on the very same day. Later, on March 15th, Oksana was placed into a medically induced coma, and she was put on life support due to her rapidly failing health. In a desperate bid to save her life, she was transferred to a specialist burns unit in Donetsk. There, she endured numerous skin grafts and surgeries in an attempt to salvage her leg, but her body was already profoundly weakened. Tragically, on March 29th, Oksana succumbed to multiple organ failure, brain inflammation, sepsis, and severe pulmonary hemorrhage, which culminated in a cardiac arrest. Despite the relentless efforts of the medical team, who fought for 40 minutes, Oksana's battle ended at 7:30 a.m. when she was declared deceased. In response to the tragedy, a massive protest rallied, drawing an estimated 10,000 people. The outcry was mirrored in other major Ukrainian cities. The collective voice of the people was clear. They demanded immediate justice for Oksana. Amidst the grief and anger, there was a palpable fear that given the connections of the perpetrators, justice might be eluded and the accused could potentially walk free. Oksana was buried in a white dress, in a white coffin, which is traditional in Ukraine for a young woman. The streets were filled with mourners, and they wanted justice. On November 27th, 2012, the Central District Court of Mykolaiv gave its verdict, finding the accused guilty on all charges. Yevgen received a sentence of life imprisonment. Maxim was sentenced to 15 years and Artem was given 14 years. The three men appealed numerous times, but to no avail, and many of the public feel that the sentences were too lenient. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay sane. On April 27th, 2016, in Hochsta, Germany, police stormed the home of Wilfried W. and Angelika B., arresting the couple for the murder of a woman they had held captive for months in horrific conditions. However, this initial charge barely scratched the surface of their depravity. Numerous women had been lured to the house through ads in a Lonely Hearts column. These women, often the most vulnerable, found themselves trapped in a nightmarish cycle of abuse, torture, and murder that could span for years. Victims were subjected to daily torment with stun guns and Bunsen burners and many other items used in their sadistic, sickening games of torture. The case became a media sensation as the grisly details emerged, and the house came to be infamously known as the House of Horrors in Hochsta. This video is longer than usual because I wanted to show you the development of the crimes and how they kept pushing to become more depraved. In Germany, they hide some individuals' identities, so I can only show you images that are publicly available, and that's why some people in this case are not identified, but we do know what happened to them. They have been dubbed the German Fred and Rose West, which tells you how horrific these crimes were. This video is created solely for educational and documentary purposes. The background of Wilfried and Angelika remain largely unknown, but here is what we do know. Wilfried was born in 1970 in Bochum, Germany. He grew up with his sister in a household dominated by their abusive, alcoholic father. The constant fear and trauma of beatings defined their childhood. Seeking escape, Wilfried's mother eventually found a new partner, a farmer, and moved the family to his rural property in the early 1990s. After enduring years of beatings, initially, the farm provided a refuge and a sense of stability. Wilfried immersed himself in farm work, which offered a welcome distraction from his turbulent past. However, the seeming tranquility was short-lived. Every Sunday, when Wilfried's mother left to work, her new partner would take advantage of her absence and intimately abuse Wilfried and his sister. They bore this additional torment in silence, feeling unable to seek help. To support himself, Wilfried took on various menial jobs. Though he struggled to find a stable career, he attempted to train as a dog handler and a mechanic, but each effort ended in failure, leaving him to repeatedly return to the farm. In 1991, Wilfried's first known relationship began with a woman named Michaela. Their relationship was casual and open, and although after a time they were not an item, they were still seeing each other. 3 years later, in 1994, Wilfried met Anya S., who had placed an ad seeking love in a local paper. They quickly connected and moved in together in the city of Paderborn. The initial happiness faded when she moves in, and Wilfried's behaviour turned violent. He began slapping Anya, which escalated to punching. Despite this, they married, with Anya perhaps clinging to the hope that marriage would bring stability and change. Instead, Wilfried's treatment of Anya grew increasingly brutal after their marriage. He beat her with boxing gloves, burned her with an iron and a hairdryer, and used a lighter to inflict further burns to her skin. Anya was left with open sores all over her body. Adding to the horror, Wilfried invited his ex-girlfriend, Michaela, to stay with them, and she joined in on the abuse. Wilfried instructed Michaela to attack Anya with a club, hitting her in the vagina and burning her. Wilfried forced Anya to drink alcohol, poured it onto her wounds, and tortured her with a heated rubber pipe. Both Wilfried and Michaela subjected Anya to relentless mental abuse, mocking and humiliating her while cheering each other on. The horrific abuse continued for weeks. Anya was explicitly warned that any attempt to escape would result in her death. Fortunately, on September 21st, 1994, Anya's family, concerned by the lack of contact, managed to rescue her from the house. Wilfried was arrested and charged. During this time, Michaela gave birth to Wilfried's child, but he had no involvement with either Michaela or the child afterwards. Wilfried received a prison sentence of 2 years and 9 months for his abuse of Anya, while Michaela received a 1-year suspended sentence for her part in the torture. Upon his release, Wilfried secured a job as a caretaker at a railway station. It was during this period, in 1999, that he stumbled upon another ad in the Lonely Hearts column, this time from a woman named Angelika. She was born on January 21st, 1970, and grew up on a modest farm with her parents. From a young age, she was involved in farm work, which defined much of her childhood and adolescence. Her life was simple and isolated, with no close friends and no particular hobbies to speak of. But importantly, she was happy. Every penny she earned from her labour on the farm was carefully saved, and by the time she reached adulthood, she had amassed around 160,000 Deutschmark, a significant sum. Despite having an IQ of around 120, Angelika had not pursued any notable academic or professional achievements. Her romantic life was equally uneventful. She had a brief fling with a man, but that relationship ended quickly when it became clear that he was interested only in her money. This left Angelika disheartened and wary of future relationships. In 1999, tragedy struck when her father passed away. Angelika was deeply affected by the loss, as she had always been close to her father. She was very much a daddy's girl. Grief-stricken, she threw herself into her work on the farm, finding solace in the familiar routines and responsibilities. The farm, however, was now short-handed. Angelika and her mother struggled to keep up with the demands of running it. Recognizing the need for additional help, Angelika's mother decided it was time to bring another man into their lives. She posted an ad in the Lonely Hearts column on Angelika's behalf, seeking a partner who could also assist with work on the farm. It was in response to this ad that Wilfried came into Angelika's life. His arrival marked the beginning of a new, albeit troubling chapter for Angelika. She described it as love at first sight. They would walk the streets hand in hand, exchanging kisses and displaying their affection openly. She was completely smitten. Just 3 months later, on March 17th, 1999, they got married. A few months after that, they welcomed a baby into their lives. On the surface, they appeared to be a happy family. However, the same cycle of abuse that plagued Wilfried's previous marriage began to appear. 4 years later, in 2003, the couple moved to Schlangen in the district of Lippe, Sadly, their baby was taken away from them for reasons that remain unknown. In an effort to isolate Angelika, Wilfried forbid her from contacting her mother. Wilfried's control of Angelika was absolute. He demanded that his meals be prepared at a specific time each day, and if she failed to meet these demands, he subjected her to hours of interrogation. If these sessions didn't satisfy him, the beatings would begin. If she disturbed him as he slept at night, he would chain her up in another part of the house, treating her as less than human. Angelika had 2 pets, a dog and a cat, but Wilfried ordered her to get rid of them, and in a horrific act of obedience, Angelika shot the dog and placed the cat in the tumble dryer. Horrific. Wilfried's cruelty extended to what he called games for his own perverse amusement. One such game, blanket torture, involved wrapping Angelika in blankets and strangling her until she passed out multiple times. In a more extreme version, he would put a bag over her head and bite her breasts, drawing blood, and this was his preferred method of the game. In court, Angelika later testified that she believed this torment was a twisted sign of love, thinking that Wilfried kept her alive because he could have easily killed her. The daily abuse included burning her with a Bunsen burner, pouring boiling water on her, stabbing her, and knocking out her teeth. Despite this relentless brutality, Angelika stayed with him. Eventually, Wilfried expressed that he no longer found Angelika attractive. He didn't want to leave her, but he needed something more. Desperate to please him, Angelika agreed to help find another woman. She began placing ads in newspapers with taglines such as "Poultry farmer seeks love," a nice guy with a car looking for a future with a woman. When women responded, it was Angelika who replied. As Wilfried was not good with writing, he would occasionally send voice messages and speak on the phone, but it was a joint effort to lure in the women. This marked the beginning of a prolonged spree of torture and murder. In 2008, 38-year-old Katie O made contact. After several phone conversations, she fell in love with Wilfried and moved in with them. To make things easier, Angelika pretended to be Wilfried's sister. Quickly, the couple assumed control over Katie's life. They changed her address to their own so that her mail would come to them. They forced her to beg her grandparents for money, which they took, amounting to thousands of euros. The physical abuse began soon after. Katie recalled a particularly brutal incident and quote, "I'll never forget this. He went shopping and then came back to me. I still had something on the stove and just opened the door for him and went back to the stove. I didn't take the shopping from him. That made him so angry that he hit me with both hands. He hit everything of mine that he could and didn't stop. I kept it to myself and worked it out myself. Wilfried convinced me that it was my fault and I believed it. I wanted to have a boyfriend at the time and I accepted that." Wilfried and Angelika even convinced Katie that she had epilepsy, forcing her to take unknown medication. Katie spent weeks locked inside her home, mentally broken and believing there was no escape. She was given a list of strict rules, such as not interrupting or talking back to Wilfried or Angelika, always being ready and attentive, and essentially acting as their obedient slave. Any failure to follow these rules resulted in severe beatings. Everything seemed hopeless for Katie until one night, Wilfried threatened to kill her. Instead of accepting the abuse, something inside her snapped. She ran to the bathroom and escaped through a window, fleeing to a neighbour's house and calling her brothers for help. This marked the end of her 9 months of hell. Although Katie managed to escape, she didn't report the abuse to the police. She thought no one would believe her. She just wanted to move on with her life and was grateful to have survived, which is understandable. But unfortunately, this allowed the horrific couple to continue their reign of terror on other victims. One thing Angelika learned from this experience was that when there was another female around, Wilfried attacked them and not her. She liked this. The next woman to respond to one of Wilfried's ads was named Anya W. For about 4 weeks, they had been talking on the phone, building a connection, but they had not yet met in person. Late one evening, Anya's doorbell rang. Not expecting any visitors, she cautiously opened the door and was shocked to find Wilfried standing there. Without hesitation, he proposed to her, pulling out 4 different rings. He claimed they were from his ex-girlfriends, but I have a feeling that they might have belonged to other victims. Anya's instincts screamed danger. She felt a chill run down her spine, sensing that her life was at risk. Despite her fear, she forced herself to remain calm and play along. She chose one of the rings, but kept Wilfried at the door, refusing to let him into her home. She made up a reason to return to bed, suggesting that they could continue their conversation the next day. The moment the door closed, Anya's heart raced. She knew she had to act quickly. The next day, she cut off all contact with Wilfried, telling him that on no uncertain terms that she did not want to see or hear from him again. She hoped that that would be the end of it, but her ordeal was far from over. Angelika and Wilfried retaliated viciously. They began stalking Anya's home, watching her every move and calling her almost constantly. The tension escalated as she realised they were always nearby, a lurking threat that she couldn't escape. The persistent harassment was designed to break her, to make her succumb to their control. Despite the mounting fears and stress, Anya remained strong. Her refusal to give in was a gamble with her life. Every knock on the door, every phone call was a reminder of the peril that she was in. Days stretched into what felt like an eternity, but Anya's unwavering defiance paid off. The harassment eventually ceased, and she became one of the fortunate few who managed to escape Wilfried and Angelika's clutches. Anya was safe, but I feel there were many more cases similar to hers that we just don't know about. In 2011, Wilfried and Angelika relocated from Schlangen to Hochster, lured by the offer of a vacant house at a favourable rent. After 6 years of payments, the house would become theirs, situated in a small, tight-knit community of Bosborn, with a population of around 500. The community was one where everyone knew each other, and outsiders were rare. Most villagers stayed indoors by 10 p.m, providing a perfect cover for Wilfried and Angelika's sinister activities. The couple did not integrate with the local community, preferring to keep to themselves. On the rare occasions they did interact with others, they posed as brother and sister. By this time, they had divorced, but it was likely a strategic move to avoid Wilfried's child support obligations and to ensure Angelika could retain her full benefits. This deceitful arrangement suited their dark purposes, as money was always tight. Once settled, Angelika began placing Lonely Hearts ads in newspapers far and wide, even reaching into other countries. In court, she later admitted that they were in debt to nearly every newspaper due to unpaid fees. Surprisingly, many women responded to the ads, but these were not random choices. Wilfried and Angelika meticulously selected their victims. The women who responded had to fit a specific profile. They were often single, without close family or friends. They typically belonged to a lower social class. These women were easy targets for manipulation, and ideally they did not drive. Above all, they were lonely, making them perfect prey for Wilfried and Angelika's predatory schemes. Under the cover of night, in a village that turned a blind eye after dark, Wilfried and Angelika's reign of terror unfolded. The idyllic appearance of Bosborn, masked by the horrors within their home, where innocent women were lured into a web of cruelty and abuse. This was the beginning of the House of Horrors in Hochster. The house itself was a dilapidated nightmare, the very image of a house of horrors. The walls were covered in mould, the wallpaper hung in tatters. Outside, a chaotic mix of chickens, goats and pigs roamed the grounds. Inside, one room was just for stray cats, adding to the sense of neglect of the place. An unused bedroom lay upstairs, cold and empty. The living room was the space in which they lived, the only space they could heat with a gas bar fire. It contained a worn-out sofa, a mattress and a cooker. The entire property was in such despair that it was no surprise that they were offered it at a low rate. One of the first women to respond to Wilfried and Angelika's ads was an unnamed woman. She had been chatting with Wilfried over the phone for weeks and believed he was a kind man. This woman had 4 children who were her world. She agreed to meet Wilfried, and he and Angelika picked her up. The moment she arrived at their house, her heart sank. The place reeked of decay and filth. She had no idea Angelika would be there, and every instinct screamed that she was in grave danger. Terrified, but determined to stay composed, she forced herself to remain calm on the outside. She needed to survive for her children. That night, they forced her to sleep on the grimy sofa, with Wilfried spooning her from behind, while Angelika lay on the mattress on the floor below, treated almost like a dog. In the dead of night, she was jolted awake by Wilfried, trying to intimately assault her. Summoning every ounce of strength, she managed to fend him off without provoking his anger. Angelika witnessed this, but remained coldly indifferent. The next day, her nightmare escalated. Wilfried overpowered her and subjected her to a day of relentless intimate abuse. Angelika did nothing to help and even became jealous of the attention the woman was getting. As the woman endured the horrific abuse, Wilfried and Angelika mocked her for not enjoying it, calling her boring. Desperate and with her children constantly on her mind, she knew she had to find a way out. That evening, a desperate plan began to form in her mind. She observed the squalor around her and realised that they were desperate for money. She started to play along, talking about the potential of the house and what could be done with just a little money. She offered to help them financially, but explained she needed to retrieve some documents from her apartment. Amazingly, Wilfried and Angelika were gullible enough to believe her. They drove her back to her apartment, her heart pounding with fear and hope. As soon as she arrived, she bolted from the car and sprinted into her apartment. She slammed the door shut and barricaded it with a sofa, her body trembling with a mixture of terror and relief. She had narrowly escaped a brush with death. Though scarred from the experience, she had survived and could return to her children. Whether or not she reported the incident remains unclear. A similar situation happened with another woman, Crystal P, but her ordeal took an even darker turn. Crystal responded to one of Wilfried's ads, and like the others, ended up at his house. This time, however, Crystal genuinely fell for Wilfried, which caused Angelika to have intense jealousy. Crystal seemed content with the state of the house, even discussing plans to fix it up. Unlike the other women, Crystal was allowed to return to her flat because they both believed she would come back willingly. Crystal was happily intimate with Wilfried, but she couldn't understand why his sister was always there, tagging along with them, even during their romantic moments. This fragile sense of happiness was shattered at the beginning of 2012. Driven by pure jealousy and spite, Angelika accused Crystal of snooping around the house. In a fit of rage, she attacked Crystal with pepper spray and shaved her head. Treated like a spy, Crystal's world descended into a nightmare. Wilfried joined in on the attack, and they turned on her like a pack of wolves. The psychological torment of having her head shaved and attacked must have been terrifying for Crystal. Shortly after the attack, Crystal's nightmare got worse. She said this in court, and quote, "From then on, the terror was only day and night. When I didn't clean up once, Wilfried chained me barefoot in the pigsty. It was winter and really cold. From then on, he often chained me outside and beat me there, with the flat of his hand or with his fist. He beat me black and blue. Angelika sprayed pepper spray in my eyes. Fortunately, the pigs left me alone. Once, I almost had the chance to get help. I was told to go to the neighbours with Angelika and make a fuss because they were standing at the window and staring. I just said to the neighbours, 'Then why don't you call the police?' That was a hidden cry for help from me. But then Angelika asked me to go back to the house. Over there, they took me to the floor in the kitchen, and Wilfried choked my neck. He sat on top of me and hit me with both hands. Angelika then warned him to stop at some point. That was when I had already rolled my eyes and was on the verge of unconsciousness. I never had the chance to escape. The doors were always locked. The blinds were down. 'I want to leave,' I said to Wilfried. He just said, 'You love me, don't you?' Once, when we were mucking out, Wilfried hit me in the face with a shovel, completely out of nowhere. All I could see was him swinging. I immediately fell over and had a wound on my forehead that bled profusely. From that point on, I just wanted to go home. Crystal's life became a living hell. She was no longer allowed to go home, forced to sleep on a filthy floor instead of the couch. They stripped her of her dignity, taking her bank cards, phone and clothes. She was denied access to the toilet, forced to use a litter tray instead. A chain was fastened around her neck, and it had a lead, and she was led around like an animal. When Crystal would use the litter tray, they would both mock her for doing so. Just pure torment. The cruelty escalated further when they chained her outside in the pigsty during the night. Crystal was terrified of the pigs, especially at night. One night, her cries disturbed Wilfried's sleep. Enraged, he went outside and beat her face with a shovel, leaving permanent marks. Crystal endured 3 months of this horrific abuse. Her torment only ended when Wilfried and Angelika, one day, out of the blue, presented her with a contract to sign, falsely stating that she had been there of her own free will and had inflicted the injuries on herself. Surprisingly, after she signed it, they let her go. Perhaps they were bored of her and looking for a new victim. Traumatized and humiliated, Crystal, like many others, did not go to the authorities. Her silent suffering was another dark chapter in Wilfried and Angelika's reign of terror. Now this is where the case takes an even darker turn, descending into even worse depravity. This is a bit of a warning. The next to respond to the ad was 33-year-old Annika. Unlike many others, Annika had grown up in a loving and stable environment. She had 2 sisters who were much older and a loving mother. Annika, who had learning difficulties, lived a fulfilling life working as a housekeeper at an old people's home, where she was adored for her dedication and kindness. She had a driving license and was generally happy, though she longed for a loving relationship. When she replied to the Lonely Hearts ad, she quickly became infatuated with Wilfried. They talked on the phone multiple times a day and constantly texted. Annika gradually withdrew from her family, and after only 2 months, she decided to move in with Wilfried at the house in Hoshta, bringing her 2 dogs with her. From the moment she moved in, the manipulation began. Wilfried and Angelika limited her contact with her mother to sporadic voicemails, often asking for money under various pretexts, like vet care for her dogs or a new car. Over time, Annika's mother sent over 25,000 euros, all of which went straight to Wilfried and Angelika. Wilfried and Annika soon got engaged with a ring Wilfried bought from a supermarket, and a few weeks later, they married. Annika informed her mother of her marriage via voicemail. Her mother recounted, "Suddenly, I was only texting Annika, and then in November, I heard via voicemail that she had gotten married. It happened very quickly. Of course, I was disappointed, but I accepted her wish to marry. One of Anika's dogs went missing, later revealed to have been abandoned by Wilfried and Angelika. This dog turned out to be the lucky one. After the marriage, Anika was expected to serve Wilfried, have his food ready, and never question anything, and to take a contraceptive pill in front of him. If anything was not obeyed, you had to apologize in writing, and if you did it again, the punishment began swiftly, a disturbingly familiar pattern of abuse. For reasons unknown, Angelika had drove Anika to visit her mother. It would be their last meeting. Angelika waited in the car, whilst Anika spent about half an hour talking with her mother, apologising for taking so much money. Her mother expressed happiness for her marriage, but sadness over the lack of contact. As they hugged goodbye, Anika's mother asked, "Are you in the car here?" "Yes, Angelika is in the car. We came here together," Anika replied. "Oh, that's nice. Then I'll come with you to the car and then I can meet your sister-in-law." Straight away, Anika just said to her mother, "No, you don't want to meet her." Respecting her daughter's wishes, her mother refrained from insisting and watched as Anika left. She saw Anika walk to the car parked further down the street and drive away. Her mother later said, quote, "That was the last time I saw her." This final encounter, I am sure, still haunts her mother, knowing she let her daughter leave with a woman she never met. The abuse then reached new levels of brutality. Anika was beaten, tortured with a stun gun, scalded with boiling water, burned with lighters, strangled, and forced to drink Wilfried's urine. Most nights, she was chained to a radiator, sleeping on the floor without even a blanket. Denied bathroom access during the night, she once soiled herself. Wilfried found this disgusting, so he began chaining her arms and legs and leaving her in an old bathtub in the cellar, where she shivered through freezing nights. During this time, Angelika used Anika's phone to send messages to her mother, pretending everything was fine. She even left voicemails as herself, once calling to berate Anika's mother for not getting her a wedding present. Her mother later said, and quote, "And I get a call from Angelika. I cut it off because I didn't want to talk to this woman. She was already unpleasant to me. But she called again and left 3 voicemails at different times, saying I didn't get Anika a wedding present. I felt guilty and decided to bring her some money." Anika's mother knocked on the door of the House of Horrors, but no one answered. She was not suspecting her daughter was in any harm, never mind tied up or too sick to speak. Eventually, she left the money in an envelope and posted it through the door. Anika was growing weaker, regularly having her hair ripped out or shaved off. She looked a mess. But this wasn't enough for Angelika. She was mixing glutamate into her food. She was intolerant to it, and it made her body swell, making her even more uncomfortable. Angelika would also play cruel tricks. One of them was where she left a noose next to Anika, and when she felt at her worst, she would dream of using it, but didn't even have the energy to do so. On another day, Angelika left the back door open, allowing Anika a chance to escape. Gathering what little strength she had left, on August 1st, 2014, Anika staggered naked towards the exit. Neighbours saw her leaving the house, but she was followed closely by Angelika. Just as Anika was about to fall, Angelika cruelly held her arm out for Anika to gain support. But as Anika did, Angelika withdrew her arm, causing Anika to crash to the ground and crack her head. Neighbours reported Angelika shouting, "Get up, you lazy piece," kicking her twice in the stomach. Wilfried joined in, dragging Anika back into the house. Tragically, none of the neighbours reported this to the police. Back inside, Anika was taken to the bathtub and chained. So weak, she could barely move. She endured another of Angelika's sadistic tricks. She had turned the tap on, letting the water slowly fill around Anika. She said to Wilfried, "I've turned the water on, she's drowning now," but Wilfried intervened, shutting off the water and draining it, leaving Angelika in the bathtub overnight. Angelika would later confess, and quote, "I went downstairs and there she was, staring straight ahead. It was clear she was dead. Wilfried wanted to bury her under the dung heap or throw her into a cesspit. We put her body in the freezer. I pushed her head in so far that I could put a pizza on top of it. We bought a saw and latex gloves. I sawed off a piece of the body every day and burned it in the oven." When Angelika was sawing the body, Wilfried found it extremely disturbing, so he put a CD player downstairs in the basement where the dismemberment was taking place, so to take his mind off what was really happening. Angelika did all the, and quote, dirty work. She would grind the charred remains into a dust and mixed it with grit, and at night, Wilfried and Angelika would drive around and scatter the remains through the streets. As another blow to Annika, even after her death, Angelika would continue to write to Anika's mother. In fact, her mother only knew of her daughter's death when she seen the house on the news after the crimes had come to light. Tragic. To add to the horror, Angelika hanged Anika's remaining dog, bringing to an end her stay in the House of Horrors after roughly 14 months of abuse. More victims continued to move into the house, each one broken in their own way, but somehow they managed to survive. The last victim, however, was Suzanne F., whose arrival would ultimately bring an end to the horrors within those walls. Suzanne fit the profile of their victims perfectly. Adopted as a child, she endured the trauma of finding her mother's lifeless body at the age of 16, a heavy burden that scarred her deeply. Suzanne married young and had a child, but for reasons unknown, she left her first family. She later remarried and had another child, but once again, she abandoned this family as well. Alone and vulnerable, she answered Wilfried's newspaper ad, hoping for a fresh start. At first, Wilfried seemed like a good man. He didn't drink, and his close relationship with his sister suggested he was a family man. But the familiar patterns of abuse soon emerged. As soon as Suzanne moved into the house, her head was shaved and her money and bank cards were confiscated, and the torment began. Susan was forced to carry heavy bags up and down the stairs, a pointless task designed solely to degrade her. Wilfried and Angelika filmed her struggles, finding amusement in her suffering and mocking her. Suzanne quickly lost a significant amount of weight. On the rare occasions neighbours seen her, they mistaken her gaunt appearance and bald head for someone who was suffering from cancer. Behind closed doors, Wilfried beat her, bit her, and forced her to drink his urine. Angelika eagerly participated in the torment. Suzanne, like the others before her, was coerced into writing letters, taking responsibility for her injuries. In one such letter, she blamed her sandals for being too big, and that caused her to fall down the stairs. The abuse was relentless, and Suzanne's spirit withered away. She became a ghost of her former self. One evening, the brutality reached a horrifying climax. Wilfried beat Suzanne more than what was normal, while Angelika slammed her head into the kitchen counter. Her skull cracked, and realizing they may have fatally injured her, panic set in. Angelika, unwilling to deal with another corpse, decided they needed to get rid of her quickly. They bundled Suzanne into the car, intending to drive her back to her apartment. It was the night of April 21st, 2016. Wilfried and Angelika were speeding towards Suzanne's apartment, who was lay in the back seat. She was unresponsive. Her body was cold and covered in signs of severe abuse. She was sprawled on top of black bin bags. She was filthy and reeking of urine, desperately in need of urgent medical attention. Suddenly, the car made some unusual noises and ground to a halt. Stranded on the street, an absolute nightmare began to unfold. Despite it being a warm night, Suzanne shivered uncontrollably. She was wrapped in blankets in a futile attempt to stave off the cold. In a state of panic, Angelika dashed to the nearest house and banged on the door, pleading for someone to call a taxi. But when the taxi arrived, Suzanne's condition took a drastic turn for the worse as she started to convulse. Panic escalated into sheer terror as the couple then screamed for an ambulance instead. At the hospital, the medical team noticed all the cuts and bruises on Suzanne's body, with clear binding marks on her ankles and wrists, indicating prolonged restraint. She was also suffering from severe blood poisoning. Despite the hospital staff's frantic efforts to save her, Suzanne succumbed to her extensive injuries within an hour of arrival. Her condition was so dire that hospital staff immediately alerted the authorities. The investigation moved quickly. Just 6 days later, when authorities arrived at the house, they uncovered a trove of evidence, including contracts from multiple victims and even partial remains of Angelika. Both Wilfried and Angelika were arrested and taken into custody. Initially, Angelika denied any involvement in the crimes. However, upon learning that Wilfried was placing the blame on her, claiming that she and Suzanne were a couple and that he had no part in Suzanne's death, Angelika revealed the names of 7 women who had been tortured and some murdered by the pair. She refused to go down alone. The actual number of victims is believed to be much higher. In court, Wilfried and Angelika couldn't even look at each other. They were both charged with murder by omission, which is similar to manslaughter in the UK. Shockingly, it couldn't be proven that either Angelika or Suzanne had been murdered in cold blood. The main issue in court was determining the dynamic of the two. Angelika portrayed herself as a terrified victim, coerced in committing the atrocities on the women. Wilfried's defense focused on his mental capacity, with an IQ reported to be 59, questioning whether he truly understood right from wrong. A forensic psychiatrist said that Wilfried demonstrated characteristics common to repeat offenders, including a sadistic personality and pronounced psychopathic traits. His profile indicated a significant risk of future offences. Angelika showed traits of autism combined with psychopathy. She manipulated others through intimate relationships and exhibited a total absence of empathy. Described as exceptionally intelligent, Angelika was also known for her dominating nature and insatiable desire for control. The trial included testimony from 48 witnesses and 7 experts, but it was Crystal P's testimony that had the most significant impact. She had endured the cruelty and survived to tell her story. Crystal, still feeling shame and humiliation, asked her husband to wait outside whilst she testified. She later stated, and quote, "It was both of them in equal measure." On October 5th, 2018, Wilfried and Angelika were sentenced. Angelika received 13 years for her part in the murders, whilst Wilfried was sentenced to just 11 years, also to be served in a psychiatric hospital. In 2020, Wilfried was transferred to a regular prison after authorities deemed him fit to serve in a standard facility. He now faces the possibility of parole, but in 2022, there were calls for him to be placed into preventative detention, potentially extending his imprisonment indefinitely. Angelika is eligible for parole in 2025. I found this case to be truly shocking, and the fact that they could both be walking the streets in the near future is terrifying. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay sane. On November 10th, 2022, a group of fishermen were at work in the port of Huacho, a city in the Lima region of Peru. Amidst their routine, They were drawn to the gathering of scavenger birds nearby. Intrigued, they decided to investigate. What they stumbled upon was nothing short of horrifying. A detached finger in the sand, still adorned with a silver ring. The unsettling finds didn't stop there. Scattered in the vicinity were further remains, stripped of its internal organs, seemingly with intent. This case almost defies comprehension. A series of gruesome discoveries in Peru reveal a dark underbelly of human trafficking, and the lengths people will go to fulfill this grisly demand. Blanca, a woman who went into the digital realm in search of love, instead found herself ensnared in a real-life nightmare. It's brutal. Blanca Arellano Gutierrez was a 51-year-old single woman residing in Mexico City. She was a big part of her family, and she shared an exceptionally close bond with her niece, Carla Arellano. The two maintained a friendship that went beyond mere familial ties, always finding ways to connect and enrich each other's lives. Although not much is known about Blanca's life, her Facebook account offered a glimpse into her interests. She had a law degree, and her profile indicated that she also pursued studies in tourism. Cycling and exercise were listed among her hobbies, but it was online gaming that truly captured her social attention. When the 2020 pandemic ushered in an era of isolation, Blanca found herself increasingly alone within the confines of her home, seeking to fill her hours and perhaps a sense of community. She turned to Fortnite, a game that not only enjoyed widespread popularity, but had also seen a surge in engagement during the lockdowns. It was a virtual world that Blanca began to explore and introduced new people into her life, unaware that this choice would ultimately lead her into unforeseen dangers. Blanca's foray into the world of Fortnite led her to Juan Pablo Villafuerte Pinto, a 37-year-old Peruvian man. What began as in-game interactions soon evolved into a deeper connection. The two transitioned from casual conversations during gameplay to more personal exchanges. They swapped contact details and soon found themselves engrossed in daily conversations on platforms like Discord and Facebook. Their friendship deepened considerably. On the social media landscape, Juan Pablo managed a Facebook page named Juan Villafuerte Med, where he identified himself as a modern vintage gamer. Intrigued by the term, Blanca became an active member of his online community. She too was admin in another Facebook group named Juegos Retro, focusing on retro games. Juan Pablo joined this group under his online alias. Evidence of their close relationship was publicly documented. Juan Pablo uploaded a video on February 6th, 2021 on his Juan Villafuerte page, specifically to celebrate Blanca's 50th birthday. In this heartfelt tribute, he affectionately referred to her as Blanquita. Other loving interactions were clear to see on each other's profiles. Their interactions on these platforms revealed a budding relationship, though no one could anticipate the darker turns their connection would soon take. Blanca and Juan Pablo's bond soon escalated into a virtual romantic relationship. Blanca confided in her niece, Carla, expressing just how much she was in love with Juan and her desire to not just be emotionally with him but also physically. Living in Mexico City while Juan resided in Peru presented an obvious challenge, but the emotional attachment they developed over the 2 years seemed too precious to abandon. In January 2022, the couple had initially planned for Juan to visit Blanca in Mexico, but the plan ultimately fell through for undisclosed reasons. Months later, driven by a potent mixture of love and impatience, Blanca decided to take matters into her own hands. Financial constraints were a concern. Blanca was not in the most secure financial state. Nevertheless, she was prepared to make sacrifices for love. To fund her trip to Peru, Blanca sold off almost all of her possessions, including her car, which was integral to her work, her cherished bicycle, and various other items. On July 22nd, 2022, armed with the money she got from selling her life's belongings, Blanca embarked on her journey to Peru, ready to uproot her life for the man she loved. She was willing to do whatever it took to make this relationship work, oblivious to the grave risks this decision entailed. Blanca touched down at Jorge Chávez Airport in Peru's capital at 2:45 a.m. on Tuesday the 28th of July. Over the ensuing days, Juan Pablo played the consummate host, whisking her to iconic tourist spots and breathtaking locations. Throughout this whirlwind romantic escapade, Blanca maintained regular contact with her niece Carla, filling her in on the details of her days. Everything seemed idyllic. "I'm so happy," she said, praising Juan's kindness, wit and affection. He was everything she had fantasized about, her dream man made real. Juan reciprocated her affection with generous gifts and took her on a variety of romantic outings. Blanca was clearly smitten. Her online presence also remained active, with her latest live video game stream posted on November 6th. The initial joy of Blanca's move to Peru was short-lived and tinged with elements that puzzled her family. Blanca had mentioned purchasing a Peruvian mobile phone to stay in contact with Juan while he was away for his studies. Yet strangely, she never shared the number with her relatives. On Monday, November 7th, there was an unsettling silence. She didn't send any messages, didn't make any calls, and was suspiciously absent from her social networks. For someone as attached to her phone as Blanca, this behaviour raised immediate red flags with her family. Growing increasingly concerned, her family tried to communicate. Her niece, Carla, sent a message to Juan on Facebook, anxiously seeking any information about her aunt's sudden and inexplicable disappearance. But the answer they got back was not what they had expected. Juan's response only deepened the family's worries. He claimed that he hadn't heard from Blanca in days, suggesting that she had left him due to dissatisfaction with their life together. According to Juan, Blanca had grown bored and decided to head back to Mexico. Making her way to Lima for a departing flight, he ventured a guess that Blanca's phone might have run out of battery, accounting for her lack of communication. While his words carried a note of sadness and resignation, they also left an unsettling gap. The story didn't completely align with Blanca's past communications. where she had expressed consistent happiness and satisfaction with Juan and their relationship, Carla and the rest of the family were left with more questions than answers, their concerns intensifying with each passing moment of silence from Blanca. Sirens blared in Carla's mind. She chose to publicise her growing concerns, taking to Twitter to mobilise a search for her missing aunt. She not only issued a plea for help, but also outlined the narrative of Blanca's move to Peru to live with Juan, implying he was the last person known to have seen her. It was a thinly veiled accusation, pointing to Juan as potentially knowing more than he was letting on. The social media plea gained traction rapidly. Prompted by the online outcry, the family officially filed a missing persons report. At this time, the Peruvian police had little to act upon. Blanca was an adult, and there was no concrete evidence to suggest that a crime had even taken place. She had travelled to Peru willingly, and without signs of coercion or foul play. The authorities had limited avenues for immediate action. However, the landscape of the investigation took a sudden and dramatic turn just 2 days later, altering the course of events in a way that nobody could have anticipated. On November 10th, just 3 days into the official search for Blanca, local authorities received a deeply unsettling call that would change the trajectory of the investigation. Fishermen along the shore of Gaucho Beach had stumbled upon a grisly scene. Human remains were scattered along the sand, starting with a severed finger and followed by an arm and a head. Scavenger birds had already begun their grim feast. Authorities were quick to respond. Police secured the area, and forensic experts conducted their meticulous examinations. The condition of the remains suggested a deliberate effort to prevent identification. The face and fingertips had been skillfully dissected. Despite the challenges posed by this gruesome act, experts were able to determine 3 key factors. First, the remains belonged to a woman estimated to be in her 40s. Second, her fingerprints were not in RENIAC's records, Peru's National Identification Registry, indicating that she was likely a foreign citizen. Though the remains could not be positively identified on the spot, the evidence led many, including the investigators, to speculate. Could these remains belong to Blanca? Had her journey for love ended in this horrific manner? And if so, what role, if any, had Juan played in this dreadful outcome? The third key discovery of a silver ring on one of the severed fingers immediately drew investigators' attention. This detail was alarmingly consistent with Blanca's missing persons case. Her family, already anguished, sent over photographs for confirmation. The ring in the pictures matched the one found on the finger. Though this grim confirmation brought a wave of sorrow to Blanca's relatives, formal identification still awaited DNA analysis. On November 16th, the family made the bleak journey to Lima to assist with the required DNA tests. Meanwhile, the pressing questions remained. Who was responsible for this gruesome act, and how had it been executed? The prevailing theory was that the murder occurred elsewhere, and the dismembered remains were subsequently discarded on the beach. Then another shocking discovery unfolded on November 11th. At the dry mouth of the riverbed at Trelillos Beach, Police found a decapitated torso that unmistakably belonged to the same dismembered body found days before. Chillingly, all internal organs had been surgically removed. It was a good, clean job, and the person who made those cuts had to be someone with some medical knowledge, and one had been studying medicine. This macabre detail only drove investigators to intensify their efforts to unravel this grim mystery. By November 12th, public scrutiny had shifted decisively towards Juan Pablo, largely due to the tweet from Carla. She not only appealed to the community to help find her missing aunt, but she explicitly cited Juan as the last person to see Blanca in Peru. His image as a suspect was now solidified in the eyes of the public. Juan Pablo attempted to deflect these allegations by taking to social media. He said Blanca was a homeless person in Peru, describing himself as a kind-hearted person who offered her money and shelter. He also dismissed their relationship as romantic, saying that Blanca was mentally unstable and that she simply made this up. Carla, however, swiftly shot down these claims. An online battle of words ensued. Carla ardently defended her aunt, while Juan Pablo employed every tactic to remove himself of any responsibility. Sensing the growing tension and uncooperative behaviour, the public prosecutor's office moved swiftly. On November 13th, they announced plans to accelerate the investigation by travelling to Haucho. Here, they would gather more information and formally summon Juan Pablo for questioning. On November 14th, he reported to the Criminal Investigation Department. His stony demeanour continued. He exercised his right to remain silent and declined to cooperate with investigators. He did, however, claim he had no romantic relationship with Blanca. Other people who lived close to where Juan and Blanca lived were also interviewed. The landlord of their house confirmed that he and Blanca were romantically involved for several months, a claim backed by other neighbours. Additionally, a woman from the same building revealed that Juan had bought large black bin bags from the shop just days before Blanca went missing, suggesting that they could have been used to move the body. Frustrated but undeterred by Juan's evasive tactics, the prosecutor overseeing the case took the next logical step, investigating the home of Juan, which he had shared with Blanca. On the 15th of November, the authorities conducted a thorough search of Juan's apartment. During the search, they uncovered a Mexican flag, women's clothing, suitcases and remnants of hair, and most notably, multiple areas of the apartment showed signs of blood. After this, the horrific images were shared with the media and then given to the public. Luminol tests, a substance known for illuminating in the presence of blood traces, even when efforts have been made to clean them, brought to light the fact that despite attempts to conceal his actions, blood residue was still detectable on various surfaces. These included the bed, floor, walls, kitchen, bathroom, laundry room, as well as on various items such as scissors, bags and other utensils. The severity of the findings in his home left little doubt in the mind of the investigators or the public. He was heavily involved in the disappearance of Blanca. Juan's attorney was in a precarious position, as the blood evidence and personal items of Blanca found at the residence had irrefutably connected him to her. The results of the DNA tests on the blood and hair samples were still pending, but the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. In the afternoon, on November 17th, an arrest warrant was handed down by the Peruvian legal authorities for Juan Pablo, who was the prime and only suspect in the missing case of Blanca. However, Juan had already fled. The situation was further complicated by the revelation that he had an identical twin, raising concerns within the victim's family and the authorities that he might impersonate his twin, thus allowing the actual culprit to escape justice. Luckily, later that same day, Juan Pablo was located by the National Police in a section of Villa El Salvador, a district in the south. He was in a house where he was living with his new partner. During the arrest, the officers questioned Juan to find out if he was aware of the arrest warrant against him, to which he flatly denied. He also again denied any involvement in Blanca's disappearance. He was then transported to the main office of the National Directorate of Criminal Investigation and placed under an initial 72-hour detention. Juan Pablo's life was now the main topic of conversation in the national media. He gave conflicting statements during interrogation. He said he wasn't involved with Blanca and wasn't near the area where she disappeared. In court, he said the case was hurting his family and his studies. He claimed to be innocent. He expressed wishes for peace for the family of the victim and said that the police should find the real culprit. The case took a darker turn when investigators discovered a series of videos on Juan's TikTok account featuring human organs, specifically a stomach, a pancreas and a brain. Exactly the organs missing from the body found on the beach. What was already a brutal crime now looked like it could also involve organ trafficking. The media also reported statements from a medical professor who called for his expulsion for allegedly trying to trade human organs. Security footage showed Juan Pablo buying chemical cleaning supplies on the day he claimed to be at his other residence, away from the crime. His last Google searches were about how to reset a mobile phone, suggesting he was trying to wipe a device and launder it. Another significant element was that Juan was absent from his biology classes on Monday 7th, Tuesday 8th and Wednesday 9th in November. This coincides with the days on which the last evidence of Blanca's life was found. He is currently in custody while the legal process plays out. I think it's harrowing to believe that Juan had planned this from the very start. Years in the making. He wanted to harvest the organs of a woman, and to do so, he started a love affair online years prior. Then to get her to eventually leave her country, her friends, and her family, all of her safety, to be alone with you, where she inevitably went missing. Terrifying. During the initial legal hearings, Blanca's family shared previously unheard information. They said that her demeanour had changed in the final days of communication. Her tone was subdued, as though she was afraid of being overheard. The prosecutor also revealed that on November 3rd, days before she went missing, Blanca had called the airline to ask for a refund on her return ticket to Mexico, but was told it was impossible. She was apparently living on a meager 80 sols a week, provided by Juan. Also, the couple didn't see each other daily. Juan was away at university for 2 days a week. During his absence, Blanca was forced to remain hidden in their shared room due to the landlord's one-person occupancy rule. Their living arrangement was clearly not working. The prosecutor also introduced new evidence. Bleach and another cleaning agent called Pine Sol were found in Juan's bathroom. Additionally, the prosecutor highlighted that the discovered body had precise cuts where the face and vital organs were removed. Such surgical precision could only have been executed by someone with medical training. Juan took the opportunity to defend himself, arguing that he was being targeted due to his medical studies. He insisted he was not in Haucho during the days of Blanca's disappearance. As for the unsettling videos, Juan claimed that his TikTok channel was intended solely to help other students with their exams. He portrayed himself as a victim of circumstance. As the legal proceedings unfolded, forensic results confirmed that the body parts discovered indeed belonged to Blanca. Consequently, Juan's charges escalated from disappearance to murder. The prosecution's case continued to solidify. Evidence revealed that Juan had intentionally disabled the GPS on his phone to evade location tracking. But the case was far from closed. The prosecution disclosed that Juan had an accomplice in his best friend, Edison Amir Flores, who owned a cargo motorbike. On the evening of November 7th, both men were seen using the bike to buy 8 large bin bags, 2 packs of cigarettes and biscuits from a local shop near the crime scene. 30 minutes later, Juan informed his landlord that he'd parked a motorbike in the building's hallway. The following day, he purchased disinfectants and subsequently stopped attending his university classes. Although Edson admitted to these actions, he denied any knowledge of a murder. But by this point, the case against Juan had amassed more than 60 pieces of corroborating evidence. Faced with overwhelming weights of the facts, Juan decided it was time to come clean. The accused admitted that he was in the city of Haucho at the time of the crime. Juan said he arrived on the 6th of November at the room he shared with Blanca. He rang the doorbell, but nobody answered. This was inconsistent with the version given by his friend. Juan emphasized his cooperation with the police from day one. He also complained about the harsh conditions of his detention, including sleeping on the floor next to criminals and not being able to bathe. However, these statements did little to sway the court's opinion. On November 22nd, Juan Pablo was ordered to be held in custody for 9 months as the prime suspect in the murder of Blanca Arellano. In a letter, Juan expressed that he didn't want his family to suffer further or be treated like an animal himself. His defense team filed an appeal for his release, arguing that the evidence against him was insufficient. However, the judge disagreed and that Juan posed a significant flight risk. On November 23rd, Blanca's family set up an altar to remember her. Through her niece Carla's Twitter account, they confirmed that the body found on the beach in Haucho was that of her aunt. Images of white floral arrangements were visible as Carla urged Peruvian authorities to ensure justice is served in her aunt Blanca's murder. She hopes the trial sets a precedent for punishing those who commit such crimes. Carla also expressed gratitude to the media and the authorities to keep Juan Pablo behind bars. This one has been truly sickening. The brutal behaviour and the sheer disregard for human life. Truly abhorrent. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay sane. Tucked within the lively framework of Lapu-Lapu City in the Philippines exists a tranquil village called Mactan, a haven from the city's bustling pace. This modest sanctuary was the unassuming place Christine Lee Silouan's called home. On March 9th, 2019, the 16-year-old arranged to meet a love interest, unaware of the tragedy that loomed ahead. The calm was shattered the following day when Christine's lifeless and disfigured body was found after undergoing a truly horrifying act of violence. The crime was so severe it caused a national outrage and calls for the death penalty to be reinstated. What happened to Christine that night was truly horrific, and even though the legal system has declared this a closed case, there remains a sense of unease and dissatisfaction within the community. Many people believe that true justice is unfulfilled and that the perpetrators remain free. Christine Lee Silouan was one of the students at Maribago National High School, and similar to other young people today, she loved the K-pop band BTS and enjoyed watching animes. She also volunteered at her local church, the Sacred Heart Parish. Every Sunday, she worked as a collector for them, leaving her home at 4 p.m. each Sunday to fulfill her role, and she would return after the service was over. One Sunday, however, deviated from the routine, as Christine didn't return home by 7 p.m. on March 9th, 2019. This unexpected deviation filled her mother, Lourdes Silouan, with concern. This was out of character for her. Her family soon alerted the Philippine National Police, known as the PNP, and the search for Christine began. In the early morning light, Lourdes embarked on the desperate search for her missing daughter. Her first destination was the Sacred Heart Parish, the last known location where Christine had been seen. Poring over the church's logbook, Lourdes found confirmation of her daughter's attendance and duties the previous evening. She had indeed arrived, changed the offering at Mass, and completed her collection. Conversations with the churchgoers who had last seen Christine led to a chilling revelation. Witnesses attested to seeing Christine in the company of 3 unfamiliar men, deepening the shroud of mystery surrounding her disappearance. That same morning, the grim discovery of a partially clothed body of a young female was made in an empty field nearby Christine's home. The peaceful community was now grappling with a nightmare that was all too real. The gruesome scene presented a young woman with almost no clothing on her from the waist down, her pants having been lowered. She had been mutilated, and clearly half her face was missing, exposing the skull beneath. The sight was so distressing that none of the local residents could identify the victim. Reacting quickly, they notified the police. Upon arrival, the investigators were instantly struck by the victim's visible stab wounds, a grim sign of the extreme violence that had been inflicted upon her. Her body was transported for a more detailed examination, which revealed shocking levels of violence. Half of the victim's face had been partially dissolved by acid and meticulously stripped away with a precise tool. The medical examiner ruled out the possibility of an animal attack, citing the unnaturally clean cut and absence of any bite marks on the body. The assault escalated to further horrifying extremes as it was discovered that the perpetrator had removed the victim's trachea, esophagus, part of her neck and her tongue. The forensic team also confirmed that Christine was not forced upon, like it was initially believed. This was something the general public opposed. The examiner suggested two possibilities for such a monstrous act. Either it was ritualistic, or the perpetrator was under the influence of some mind-altering substances and was in a fit of rage. The removal of body parts was believed to be an attempt to hamper the identification of the body. The chilling confirmation arrived soon after, when a family member heartbreakingly recognised the remains. The body was indeed that of Christine. The appalling news sent shockwaves not just through Macton, but resonated on a national level. The heinous nature of the crime left the country reeling, the collective conscience crying out for answers. In response, the government issued a 2 million peso reward for information leading to an arrest. The public outcry was so intense that it prompted the National Bureau of Investigation, known as the NBI, to work on the case, bolstering the efforts of the local authorities. A cry for justice echoed throughout the nation. To many, the sequence of events was tragically clear. Christine had been forced upon, murdered, and callously discarded. As the NBI brought their resources to bear, they found CCTV footage that tracked Christine's movements, and soon after, the manhunt began. With this new evidence, the authorities announced that they were in pursuit of potentially 3 male assailants, the same individuals reportedly seen in Christine's company on that fateful Sunday. This was the last known footage of her alive. According to the authorities, Christine was murdered between 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. on March 10th, 2019. The police investigation led to a suspect named Jonas Martel Bueno. He was initially apprehended in connection with the murder of a 62-year-old farmer in Danao City, Cebu. Although he denied any involvement in Christine's case, his name was drawn into the spotlight due to the striking similarities between the modus operandi in both killings. Bueno was partly implicated in the brutal murder and skinning of the elderly male. However, when authorities finally tracked him down, he was living under an alias on an entirely different island. Bueno confessed to the murder of the farmer, but remained adamant that he was not connected to Christine's case. He cited an alibi of conflicting timelines, which, surprisingly, turned out to be accurate. His alibi was later verified by his employer, who confirmed that Bueno was at a job site on the day that Christine was tragically murdered. The case took a controversial turn with the introduction of the second suspect, a teenager named John, believed to have been identified in the CCTV footage. John was known to have had a romantic history with Christine. The pair had allegedly broken up just days before the incident. His identity has been hidden for legal reasons. The NBI stated that John confessed to committing the horrific crime, driven by intense jealousy. He even admitted to having accomplices. CCTV footage shows Christine with a man, and in one particular frame, she is seen to be in a dispute with him. The NBI confirmed that based on their analysis, the man in the frame was Christine's ex-boyfriend, John. A search warrant led authorities to John's residence, where they confiscated his mobile phone and other items that could potentially link him to Christine's murder. Examination of the text message exchanges reveals plans to meet after the Mass that Sunday. The NBI alleged that John had used a fabricated Facebook profile to lure Christine into meeting him that evening. They further claim that John confessed to discarding the murder weapon, a set of knives. Despite the mounting evidence, the case was far from clear-cut. John's family strongly maintained his innocence, stating that they could present 9 individuals who could vouch for his presence elsewhere at the time of the crime. Their pleas, however, fell on deaf ears, as the NBI remained resolute, basing their case on the evidence gathered. John was subjected to a psychological evaluation, which, according to the NBI, proved that he was aware of his actions at the time of Christine's murder. In response, John's family hired the services of a lawyer, Vincent Israel. On March 21st, Vincent filed a motion for John's release, arguing that the NBI lacked legal grounds for the arrest. He claimed that the confession seemed fabricated, even insinuating potential evidence planting by the NBI. The lawyer challenged the authorities to conclusively prove that the man captured in the CCTV footage with Christine was indeed his client, John. The prosecutor's office expressed disappointment over the NBI's handling of the case, criticising the arrest of John without substantial evidence. Meanwhile, the simultaneous investigations conducted by the NBI and the local police led to contrasting outcomes. John's family was relieved at his release, but the sorrowful family of Christine was left mourning their loss. 4 days after Christine was laid to rest, the President of the Philippines requested that John was rearrested. However, his attorney swiftly intervened, stating that according to the documents, the release could not be revoked. On April 2nd, 2019, a second autopsy was conducted on Christine's body. The medical examiner, contracted by the public attorney's office, confirmed that the young girl had in fact been forced upon, contrary to the previous autopsy. This was based on bleeding that was found inside her genitals. He concurred with the initial autopsy that half of Christine's face had been disfigured with acid, along with over 20 stab wounds. The examiner also verified that the victim had been strangled with a rope. The physician summarized that 2 perpetrators could have been involved in this horrific crime. This diverging set of results further highlighted the contrasting approaches different governmental branches took in handling the investigation. The discrepancies left a cloud of uncertainty hanging over the case. In a sudden twist, a month after John's arrest, 43-year-old Renato Yanez was detained for an unrelated charge. However, while in custody, he startled the police with an unexpected confession. Yanez revealed that guilt had led him to confess, asserting that he was the actual perpetrator of the crime and that he was motivated by his substance addiction. He declared that John was wrongfully accused. Yanez, a father of 5 children living with his partner, confessed to having known the victim. He used a fake profile on Facebook named CJ Diaz, whom he referred to as a chat boy. Through this, CJ and Christine became acquainted, and their relationship developed over a few months. Yanez admitted to having been in and out of prison due to substance offences. He said that he texted Christine At 6 p.m, whilst she was outside the church, he approached her, asking her to accompany him, but she had refused, stating that she was there to meet someone else. He confessed to Christine that he was in fact CJ Diaz. Christine was taken aback, since he did not resemble the man in the Facebook profile picture he had used. Yanez was much older. Christine began to walk away, but Yanez followed her to a dark, secluded spot known as the Sitio. Yanez was walking beside her, using his phone's torch to light the way. Yanez admitted that he asked Christine to have intimate relations with him, but she refused. He didn't like Christine's answer, so he slapped her twice. Christine then admitted that she was no longer a virgin, and this really angered Yanez. He punched her repeatedly, but because it was so noisy to muffle her screams, he revealed that he stabbed her until she fell to the ground. He then attempted to remove her shorts, but stopped when her body became unresponsive. In this final gruesome act, he confessed to skinning Christine's face to prevent anyone from identifying her. Yanez declared that he had acted alone, asserting that John was uninvolved and should be deemed innocent. But by then, the authorities didn't seem particularly interested in John anyway. Despite some discrepancies, notably Yanez's denial of forcing himself on Christine, the case was legally closed. On April 7th, the police recommended charging Yanez with murder. However, on the morning of May 25th, 2020, Yanez was found dead in his jail cell. Initial reports suggested he ended things himself, leading to swirling speculation. Some even believed that Yanez may have been killed by fellow inmates, as he was incarcerated in the same prison where Christine's uncle was also detained. Following threats to his life, he had been transferred to the infirmary, where he was discovered dead. Reportedly, he fashioned a rope from some clothes. The death of Yanez effectively closed the case. However, it left Christine's family with a deep sense of injustice. Christine's mother, Lourdes, said that she would not sign the affidavit unless her daughter's ex-boyfriend would be included in the complaint. She couldn't agree to the conditions set because the police lacked the evidence against John. She fully believed that John also had a hand in her daughter's brutal murder. John's lawyer said, "I respect Mrs. Siloan's refusal to sign the complaint affidavit unless my client is included in the case. But I hope that she would realise that by her refusal, she was refusing justice for her daughter. It is unfortunate that everyone, including my client, is wishing for justice for Christine, yet her mother refuses the very justice our community wants to obtain. It's impossible to truly grasp the depth of grief that Christine's mother and her family must be going through. This is indeed a truly harrowing case." That's the end of this episode. Until next time, stay sane. An avid hiking couple from Moscow, Russia, known for their treks through the Karelian forest, found themselves entangled in a criminal investigation, initially rooted in suspected substance distribution. Arrested in March 2021 due to the incriminating evidence found in their instant messaging exchanges, their case took a shocking turn. As the investigation deepened, the couple disclosed startling confessions that left even seasoned police officers stunned. They spoke of engaging in ritualistic killings, acts of cannibalism, and the brutal murder of 2 friends. These revelations raised questions. How had their murder spree remained unnoticed for so long? And were there really just only 2 victims? What first shocked me about this case was the images that I found. The couple seemed to be very much into the shock value of Satanism, judging by the photos that were found. But were they ever really interested? Or was it just an excuse to kill? Or did it drive them to murder? This video is created solely for educational and documentary purposes. It does not endorse or condone the criminal actions described within. Andrei Trebrenko and Olga Bolshakova, a married couple from Moscow with 2 young children, were embroiled in a substance trafficking operation. They were apprehended in Karelia, Russia, a region where Andrei had roots and connections. Law enforcement intercepted their digital communications, pinpointing the delivery location, confirming their identity by tracking IP addresses. This led to their capture and arrest. The potential penalty for their crimes could extend to 20 years in prison, surpassing even the sentence for premeditated murder. After their arrest, they were taken to Petrozavodsk, the regional hub, where the court ordered pre-trial detention as a precautionary measure. Ensuring no collusion, they were placed in separate cells. Incarceration brought unexpected revelations. Andrei found himself sharing a cell with individuals well versed in esoteric and occult practices, a domain he and Olga were surprisingly familiar with. Conversations revealed their deep-seated interest in such dark subjects, including knowledge of rituals and sacrifices. Attempting to bolster his credibility, or perhaps out of a macabre pride, Andrei claimed to know the taste of human flesh. Tracing these grisly experiences back to the Karelian forest, these confessions have led authorities to consider a connection with ongoing investigations into missing persons, believed by some to be the victims of satanic rituals, in a chilling insight into a dark world. In 1987, Andrei, known as Andrusha, was born to a respectable family in Moscow, leading a rather unremarkable childhood with his conventional parents. However, in 1999, his parents went through a temporary separation, and Andrei moved with his father to the quaint village of Chelmazy in Karelia. It is here, amid the transformative years of his adolescence, that he began to experience a shift. By the time he returned to Moscow in 2004, at the cusp of adulthood, Andrei had undergone a profound transformation. Whether it was the result of frequent relocations or the enigmatic influence of the mystical Karelian forest, Andrei found himself drawn to the ancient practices of shamanism. He delved into esoteric literature, consulted tarot cards, and gradually came to believe in his own unique mystical abilities. Back in Moscow, Andrei didn't take long to gravitate towards others who shared in his esoteric interests. Together, they engaged in sacrificial rituals, claiming to honor Satan, often using black roosters for their ceremonial offerings. They didn't shy away from using their own blood in these rituals, and over time, Andrei took his practices a step further, creating artwork painted in his own blood. In his work resume, Andre indicated that in the 2000s, he studied to become a pastry chef, worked as a storekeeper, also as an orderly in the intensive care unit of a hospital, and served in the army. Andre also found work as a tattoo artist, and it was in doing this that he got to know Olga Bolshakova. Olga had wanted a devilish tattoo, and the pair got chatting, but this was not the first time they had met. Olga harboured an early fascination with the unknown and mystical. As a child, she faced the torment of schoolyard bullies, and it was within this sanctuary of the magical world that she found her escape from the harshness of her everyday life. In some aspects, Olga pursued a conventional path, attending a tax academy and securing employment. However, in her private life, she plunged ever deeper into the occult, descending into the shadowy embrace of satanic rites. Her unique interests inevitably drew like-minded individuals to her, leading to relationships that further aligned with her dark hobbies. In a fateful turn of events, in 2015, a boyfriend introduced her to a gathering of the Legion of Darkness. It was at this very gathering that she crossed paths with Andre, a moment that would intertwine their destinies in the most profound and eerie of ways. The man Olga was dating did not satisfy her, and quickly she and Andre were together. On the internet, Andre created an identity known as Cold Void on Satanist forums and social media, a moniker which symbolized his bleak view. His online writings often delved into the macabre topic of human sacrifice and deviant acts. His profile, once an open book of personal interests, such as artistic tattooing, the fine arts, motorcycles, exploration, music, and the study of dead ancient languages. But this has since become a clean slate, suggesting a retreat from his once outspoken persona. Olga, on the other hand, maintains her online presence, albeit selectively. In 2019, she expressed her disdain for conventional thinking, stating, "People who think in stereotypes live in a narrow, limited world, clinging to it like a drowning person to a straw. Everything that transcends stereotypical conclusions is cast aside as unreal, non-existent, or simply wrong, regardless of any factual counter-arguments." As Andre delved deeper into the mysteries of the afterlife, it appeared to consume him, becoming the central focus of his existence. His pseudonym, Cold Void, symbolizing from a satanic perspective a void within, as if he were preparing his soul for some grand yet ominous undertaking. Seeking broader acceptance within the esoteric communities, he reached out to the St. Petersburg Church of Darkness, an institution spearheaded by Valentin Skar, a figure renowned for his satanic influence. However, satisfying the growing demands of the demon he believed resided within proved to be an increasingly difficult task. Reports suggest that both Andre and Olga became part of the international occult satanic network known as the Order of the Nine Angels, ONA, which emerged in England during the 1960s and later moved across Europe, eventually penetrating Russia. What drew them to the ONA was the group's philosophical stance that not only justified but encouraged sacrifices, particularly human ones. Eager to find like-minded individuals, their search was swift and soon fruitful. In the early stages of their relationship, Andrei and Olga discovered an online community named Legion of Darkness, founded by Vlad Cherny, a former police officer whose career was marred by corruption, resulting in multiple incarcerations. Within this shadowy community, one of the key figures was Vithiya McGee, also known by her real name, Vithiya Zatsvia, a 27-year-old from Moscow. Vithiya was a striking figure, albeit someone whose personal life had seen its share of turmoil. The core of everything is Satan. The crown of all living things is death. This was her motto, which turned from a set of words into an eerie reality. Vithiya was one of the administrators for the Legion of Darkness, and every so often, some group members would meet in cafes and they would talk and share ideas. Andrei arrived at one of these meetings with an intensity that could not be ignored. He wasn't there to listen, but to hold forth on topics that he found compelling. The devil, the concept of murder, and his grandiose visions of hell. His rhetoric was so extreme that it unnerved even the most experienced of Satanists. Consequently, several members of the club distanced themselves from Andrei. They did not believe he stood for what they believed in. However, there were a few who did not turn away. Among them was Vithiya. Although Andrei had arrived with Olga, they were not sat together in the group, and Vithiya just fell in love with him instantly. She was mesmerized by him. Andrei's association with the Legion of Darkness didn't produce the outcome he had anticipated, but he did manage to participate in a number of rituals with Olga, Vithiya, and a few other devotees. These rituals were intense affairs involving the use of blood, mercury, alcohol, and substances. Andrei's ambitions escalated, and during one fateful gathering, he and his cohorts pledged to escalate their commitment through a genuine sacrifice. They all vowed to take a human life. Despite their oath, the group began to fracture under the weight of deciding on a victim, and eventually they disbanded. Under the weight of deciding on a victim, Andrei vanished for quite some time after this. When he finally resurfaced, nearly a year later, he had undergone a transformation. He was just as ruthless and inebriated as before, but now he had sharpened his teeth, presumably to resemble the devil more closely. He quickly re-established a relationship with Olga, and they progressed rapidly. Soon, Andrei was living with her in Balashika. Vithiya, still infatuated, remained a peripheral figure in their lives. Andrei's fixation on committing a murder still persisted. It wasn't long before Andrei had figured out all the grim details, the who, the when, and the where of his intended act. Andrei shared his ominous plan with Olga. He made it clear that Vithiya's love was unwavering. All he would have to do is click his fingers and she would be there. With his birthday soon approaching, Andrei saw it as an opportunity for the ritual they had sworn to undertake. In preparation, Andrei sourced handcuffs and selected a knife with a handle carved from human bone. He extended an invitation to Vithiya to accompany him to Karelia. There, he assured her that there were some shamanic places where enormous power is located, and some mysterious ritual with sacrifice can be performed. She accepted without hesitation, unaware that Olga would be joining them. Both were jealous of each other because of their feelings for Andrei. Olga and Andrei ventured ahead into Chelmuzi. They took their time to prepare meticulously, familiarizing themselves with the terrain, even going as far as to dig a grave. Andre then set about constructing what could only be described as an altar, laying the groundwork for the dark ceremony that was to follow. Victoria's mother, during her interview with the criminal investigation officers, recalled that Victoria had seemed ecstatic about her forthcoming trip northward. Despite her daughter's evident joy, the mother found it peculiar that Victoria hadn't packed essentials typically taken on long trips, such as warm clothes or ample food supplies, or even shelter. Victoria departed with little more than the clothes on her back, dressed entirely in black, with jeans, a sweatshirt, trainers, and the addition of a small backpack and a chest-worn amulet. Victoria had forewarned her mother about the possibility of a bad phone signal, which initially delayed her mother's worry. It was only after a couple of weeks without contact that her mother's concern peaked, prompting her to contact the authorities. In June 2016, Victoria set off on a journey she believed would be transformative. She prepared her backpack, took out a loan, and acquired substances, all in readiness for her departure to Moscow, to the northern reaches of Karelia. With a sense of destiny, she shared with her friends the romantic notion of her lover waiting for her beside a fire in the forest, unaware of the tragic turn her fate would take. Victoria embarked on her fateful journey to Petrozavodsk via train, followed by a bus ride to Chalmuzy. Her heart was set on the long-anticipated reunion. Upon arrival, she found Andre in a state of inebriation, a familiar sight as she had rarely seen him sober. She even brought him vodka, reinforcing the tragic pattern of their encounters. Tragically, they walked through the village, trailing a path into the forest that led to a lakeside, their final destination looming ahead. The tranquil scene was shattered by a sudden, violent strike that sent Victoria tumbling to the ground. Gazing up at Andre, her eyes filled with a profound sadness. A grim realization dawned on her. This day would be her last. Overwhelmed by shock, or perhaps still bound by an unyielding devotion, she offered no resistance as the prearranged handcuffs clasped around her wrists. It was then that Olga emerged onto the path, and even as the ultimate betrayal unfolded, Victoria could not accept it. Olga and Andre escorted their unresisting victim to the brink of the pre-dug grave. Victoria remained silent, devoid of screams or pleas, seemingly resigned to her fate. She awaited the commencement of the so-called sacred ritual with a belief that the devil would not abandon her. Tied and on the floor, Andre, the man Victoria loved, pulled out his knife carved from bone, and he kissed her as he stabbed her in the neck. He was still kissing her when blood began to gush from her neck. Andre cut some of Victoria's flesh from her thigh. He then begins to deliver a speech in a ritualistic manner. He then proceeds to boil her flesh in a small pan on the campfire whilst drinking vodka. Olga is the one who buries her remains in the grave. In a haunting display of detachment from the brutality of their actions, Andre took to Instagram the day after the grim event. He used a dedicated account, one he had specifically set up for the trip, to post images of the clearing and the fire. Among the photographs was one showing a pot over the coals, in which meat porridge was cooking. a dark reminder of the act they had committed. The casual nature of the post, juxtaposed with the violence of the previous day, painted a chilling picture of Andrei's psyche. A few days following their horrendous act, Andrei and Olga retreated to their normal lives in Moscow, but Andrei was filled with conflicting emotions. Fear of being discovered for the atrocity lay heavy on his mind, yet there was an overwhelming urge to boast about fulfilling his dark oath to his fellow Satanists. It was his addiction to alcohol, described as his main demon, that tipped the scales. In an alcohol-fueled lapse, the veil over the secret was lifted almost immediately. Also, Victoria's absence did not go unnoticed. She had been vocal about her journey to Karelia, and her failure to return added a sinister significance to her disappearance. Yet somehow, Andrei and Olga were never questioned by authorities. It was reported that during the summer of 2016, the couple went on hikes numerous times after the first killing. But up to now, from the testimony from Andrei, we only know how one of them ended. The August trip. This time, Olga acted as the bait. In the summer of 2016, in St. Petersburg, 27-year-old Platon Stepanov reconnected with an old friend, Olga. Their friendship had been kindled by a mutual interest in the occult and visiting mysterious locations. Olga reached out to him in June, though their plans to meet didn't materialize. Then, a month and a half later, she appeared again, this time with Andrei. She invited Platon to join them on a trip to Przyrsk, and he accepted the invitation. Platon was among those who sought to explore a deeper part of himself. Informing his family, Plato, for short, mentioned that he would be embarking on a hiking trip with some acquaintances from Moscow, located in the Przersky district. This area, set approximately 150 kilometers north of St. Petersburg, lies along the scenic banks of Lake Ladoga. Come August, Plato got off the train and made his way to the campsite. Olga was with unfamiliar companions, and they were there to greet him. The companions were another couple, there for the ritualistic murder. They were a rock musician, Alexander Pervoshikov-Kumuri, and his girlfriend, Tatiana. Plato looked forward to the days ahead, filled with rituals, deep conversations, and the raw thrill of adventurous tourism. The anticipation hung heavy in the air, but this was never going to happen. Plato was caught off guard by a sudden, sharp blow. Disorientated, he struggled to comprehend what had just occurred, as a ringing noise filled his ears and a sharp pain radiated across his chest. As his vision cleared, he saw two figures approaching. Among them, he recognized Andrei. A flurry of blows followed, and before Plato could react, ropes were being secured around him. In moments, he was rendered immobile, a helpless victim to the unfolding situation. The four people dragged Plato across the ground to position him near a stone, seemingly preparing to recite some form of ritual. Olga, holding a knife, drew it across Plato's throat, inflicting a wound that appeared superficial. Then, Andrei took the knife from her. In her later testimony, Olga would say that her action was not the fatal one, insisting that Plato did not die by her hand. Plato died after his throat was cut with a ritual dagger. He was also stabbed directly in the heart. His murder was also accompanied by ritual actions and cannibalism. The killers collected Plato's blood into a pre-prepared bowl and read a satanic prayer to complete the ritual. They then boiled the blood on the fire, followed by each drinking some. All four played a big part in his murder. Tatiana would later state, the meaning of this whole action was to appeal to the dark forces. The next morning, the occultists cut a piece of meat from the corpse near the ribs. They then cooked the meat over an open flame and ate it. It was noted that it was Tatiana who dug up the body in order to taste human flesh. Like Victoria, Plato is reported missing, but nothing happens. Andre and Olga had their first child, a daughter, a year after the summer murders of 2016. And a couple of years later, they had a second child. Despite the dark shadow cast by their actions, it appeared that the couple continued their ventures into the wilderness, as shown by the photographs on Olga's social media. These postings suggested that their excursions into nature remained a regular part of their lives, but reportedly, by this time, the couple had lost interest in sacrifices and became involved in substance trafficking. According to the prosecution, they purchased small quantities of strong substances through the dark net, packaged them into single doses, and tried to distribute them through so-called bookmarks, a term used to describe hidden stashes of substances that buyers would retrieve based on provided coordinates or clues. Once the couple were arrested and Andre had confessed to the crimes, all four of the killers were quickly in custody. Once in the pre-trial detention centre, the accused Olga entered into a pre-trial cooperation agreement with the prosecutor's office, with the understanding of which she admitted guilt in substance trafficking and reported her involvement in the ritual murder of Victoria. And Olga admitted they made the second sacrifice in the company of another couple. For 5 years, investigators diligently sought concrete evidence to substantiate the rumours swirling within the Satanist circles that the murders had taken place. Their search for the truth is ongoing. Andre and Olga have pinpointed the specific locations where they buried the victims. In an effort to corroborate their testimonies, authorities escorted the couple to the sites of the murders for verification. Due to Olga cutting a deal, she was given a 12-year sentence. The other 3 perpetrators, Andre, Alexander and Tatiana, are still awaiting sentencing. Andre is also under investigation for a 3rd murder after he reportedly converted to Islam and attacked someone who did not agree with his beliefs, killing them in the process. In the wake of their confessions, Andre and Olga have presented conflicting narratives. Olga has accused Andre of drawing her into the world of substances and the consequent murders, while Andre vehemently denies these accusations. In a public statement, Andre's sister defends her brother, suggesting that Olga is attempting to deflect blame onto him. His sister portrays Andre as a man who is not marred by such dark endeavours, but instead characterised by his work as a chef and his interests in motorbikes, a stark contrast to the life he led after meeting Olga. Individuals suspected of being accomplices to the murders were interrogated. Some ended up being released whilst others remained in custody. However, a lingering question hangs over the investigation because Andre and Olga had been at large for 5 full years after the murders. Is it possible that there's more victims? In the midst of this, the couple's 2 children, with their parents serving long-term prison sentences, were sent to live with their grandmother on Olga's side. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay sane. Wednesday, the 13th of May, 2015, was a regular day on the island of Pungudativu in northern Sri Lanka. At least it was, until the serenity was shattered by discovery that was anything but ordinary. The body of a missing 18-year-old student had been found near an abandoned building. The crime didn't just end a promising life, it revealed an unsettling reality about the society in which it occurred. The case brought to light deep-rooted issues that had been simmering just below the surface for generations. Women aren't safe, and the police won't help, even when you need them the most. The information in this video is sourced from global news reports, and there was something mentioned repeatedly which was equally as alarming as the heinous crime itself. It was the inadequate response from the authorities. The incident appears to be a turning point for Sri Lanka, highlighting the critical gap in support systems for local residents. Sigaloganathan Vithiya was born on the 25th of November 1996. Her parents had been displaced in the Sri Lankan Civil War of the early 1990s, and for the first few years of her life, Vithiya and her family moved frequently. They had no fixed home, and whenever they thought they had found a place to settle, they would inevitably be forced to move on to the next location. Despite the turmoil of her early years, Vithiya was vibrant and happy. She enjoyed meeting new people, and she was a diligent student. When Vithiya was in her early teens, her family were caught up in brutal fighting, and they were detained in a controversial internment camp alongside 300,000 other displaced citizens of Sri Lanka. A year later, they were finally freed to return to the island of Punggudativu, where her parents originated from. Peace and stability had been a long time coming for Vithiya and her family, but once they set foot on their home ground, they felt safe and positive for the future. Little did they know that horror was lurking just around the corner of their own quiet village. As soon as Vithiya had settled back into life in Punggudativu, she started classes at the local college. Now aged 18, this was Vithiya's happy place, and she wanted to make the most of her final year as a student towards her A-levels. She took every extra class that she could, in the hopes that one day she would achieve her dream of becoming a teacher or working in the media. Each morning, Vithiya would get up early and help her mother with chores before cycling to her school, just a little over a mile away. She usually rode with her two friends who lived on the same street, and if they weren't around, she would catch a ride on the back of her younger brother's bicycle. But on the morning on the 13th of May 2015, the two friends from the street were ill, and her big brother had already left the house for the day. So Vithiya rode the short distance on her own. There was no reason for her to be afraid. She kissed her mother goodbye and set off down the street just like every other morning. Except this day wasn't going to end the way it usually did. At 3 p.m, Vithiya's mother, Saraswati, felt a growing sense of unease. She knew something was wrong. School had ended at 2 p.m, and it was unlike her daughter to hang around without reason, especially as she hadn't mentioned attending an extra class that morning, and usually returned home well before 3 p.m. to assist with household tasks and complete her homework. With each passing minute, Saraswati's concern escalated, compelling her to ask her son to drive her to the school to investigate Vithiya's whereabouts. Upon arrival, however, they were informed by the teaching staff that Vithiya had been absent the entire day. The worry intensified as local villagers they spoke to also reported not having seen Vithiya since the previous day. By 6 p.m, they decided it was time to report Vithiya missing. But when they informed an officer at the local checkpoint that she hadn't been seen since leaving the house in the morning, the man laughed in their faces and told them that she had probably run off with a lover. It took another half an hour for them to drive to the closest police station, and 3 more hours before a female officer took them seriously enough to file a report. Okay, sometimes the missing person may have gone off with a lover. It may not always be the worst case scenario, but a parent knows. They have a gut instinct, and could you imagine the frustration, the rage that Saraswati must have felt when she was just dismissed? Shocking. It was nearing midnight by the time the family returned home, but they weren't about to allow their exhaustion to stop them finding Vithiya. By then, they knew the police weren't going to help, and instead they called on their friends, family and neighbours to carry out a search. After hours looking in the dark, the neighbours went home to get some rest before starting again at 5 a.m. the next morning. Vithiya's brother, Nishanthan, was amongst a group of searchers, scouring the roads around the village. They had taken the 2 family dogs with them in the hopes that they might detect Vithiya's scent in places they may not otherwise search. Sure enough, just 1.5 kilometers from their home, the dogs began to bark wildly. Hidden away amongst some long grass to the side of the road was Vithiya's bicycle. Laying just a few feet away were both of her shoes. It was now clear something terrible had happened to their 18-year-old, but they still needed to find her to know for sure. Nishanthan was terrified about what he might find if he looked any further, but he wasn't about to abandon his big sister. He led the dogs away from where the bicycle was and towards a number of abandoned buildings, which children in the village often joked were haunted. He didn't find ghosts, but what he did find still haunts him to this day. Just outside of the buildings was a small cluster of trees. In between 2 of them, he found what was left of his sister. Vithiya was found mostly naked, and her hands were tied behind her back with her own tie. Inside her mouth was a gag made out of cloth, and her 2 legs were pulled apart and tied to the 2 trees on either side of her. One of her eyelids was cut, and her face was badly bruised and swollen. You can only imagine the horrors that Vithiya went through in those brutal final moments. The emotional weight for Nishanthan is unimaginable, while his determination and refusal to give up hope is commendable. The grim discovery must have been a gut-wrenching realization that confirmed their worst fears. The emotional toll is surely immense and long-lasting. I really feel for him. It was 7 a.m. when Nishanthan rang the police in Kites to report what he had found. It was the same station he visited the night before to report his sister missing, and just like their reaction then, the officers gave no indication that they were even a little bit interested in what was clearly a brutal attack and violent murder of his 18-year-old sister. When they realised they weren't going to offer him any help, he rang the Colombo police station using the emergency 119 line. Colombo is the largest city in Sri Lanka and home to the majority of its law enforcement agencies. Finally, at 11 a.m, officers began to arrive at the scene. The discovery of Vithiya's body and word of her brutal slaying spread far and wide across Sri Lanka. 2 days after she was found tied up between 2 trees at an abandoned building, her funeral was held at the local cemetery. More than 1,000 people turned out to pay their respects. It wasn't so much the facts of her murder which drew people in, although that definitely played a part. It was the fact that law enforcement had been so disinterested right from the get-go. They initially tried to play her disappearance off as a runaway teen, and even when her brother was looking at her body, they refused to send officers to investigate. Her murder stirred up long-held feelings of resentment and mistrust within the community, and particularly for women. Many felt that Vithiya's murder was a reflection of deeper societal issues of gender-based violence, inadequate law enforcement, and the justice system that often seemed distant and unresponsive. On the same day as Vithiya's funeral, the police announced the arrest of 3 brothers who they claimed were responsible for her attack and murder. Apparently, the 3 men had a long-running feud with Vithiya's parents. They had decided that the most reasonable course of action was to abduct her on the way to college, and then they essayed her, and then murder her. That in itself is horrific enough. But 2 days later, the case took an even darker turn when they announced that 5 further men had been arrested for their part in the slaying. The 5 young men were originally from Colombo, but they had travelled to the village on the day Vithiya went missing. That night, after the attack, they went back to Colombo. But wait, because it gets even more disturbing. They returned to the village and attended their victim's funeral. They were arrested that day as they tried to leave Pungudu Tivu. The audacity of killers who attend their victim's funeral is truly shocking. Do they do this to deflect attention, or is it one final twist of cruelty? I'm sure it depends on the perpetrator, but either way, it's a seriously cruel act. A 9th man was arrested on the 18th of May. The circumstances surrounding the arrest of Mahalingam Sasikumar, otherwise known as Swiss Kumar, add to the narrative that more powerful forces are at play in Sri Lanka than justice, especially when it comes to women. Local rumours indicated that Swiss Kumar was a man with significant connections, both with Sri Lanka and overseas. There were talks of his alleged ties to influential figures, and some even speculated that he used these connections to evade arrest. Indeed, it wasn't the police who captured him, it was villagers. They attacked him and tied him to a power pole, and when he was finally handed over to the police, he demanded medical treatment. But when he was at the Jaffna hospital, he managed to escape and flee to Colombo, where he attempted to secure passage to Switzerland. There was even suggestion that a government minister and a university professor had aided and abetted his escape, though both men denied the allegations. In the months after Vithiya's murder, there were also allegations that Swiss Kumar filmed the attack in order to sell the film to the Switzerland mafia. A truly chilling thought if this is to be true, as it won't be the only time it's happened. All these rumours about connections and cover-ups are speculation, but they do fuel the idea that Vithiya's murder might have been part of a larger network or scheme, rather than a standalone act. Vithiya's murder and circumstances surrounding the response to her death prompted widespread protests in Sri Lanka. When those suspected of her death were brought to court on the 20th of May. They were pelted with projectiles, and riot police had to use tear gas to disperse the crowds. 127 protesters were arrested. Demonstrators wanted the immediate punishment of the arrested suspects. Some have taken matters into their own hands. 3 of the suspects' houses, which were in the local vicinity, had been attacked and burnt down by angry villagers. It took nearly 2 years for the trials of the men accused of Vithiya's attack and murder to begin. They were indicted on 41 counts, including abduction, SA, and being members of unlawful assembly. Ultimately, 7 of the men were given the death sentence, including the suspected, well-connected Swiss Kumar. But before they meet their end, all of the convicted must spend 30 years in prison. They were ordered to pay restitution to Vithiya's family. 2 of the men were released on all charges due to lack of evidence tying them to the case. Vithiya's death was not just a personal tragedy, but a case that exposed deep-seated societal issues in Sri Lanka. Her case prompted authorities to consider their responsibility to address gender-based violence and their roles in protecting the vulnerable. How much will change as a result of her death remains to be seen. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay sane.